Good afternoon, colleagues. Let's begin, bearing in mind that two speakers will have to excuse themselves a bit early. I suggest that we start with a question. Before our discussion, there was a report on OSINT in terms of the company, public organizations, business. What is the difference, in your opinion, between the open source data analysis when Telegram channels have been hacked, when using the shade on the photo, which is being used in order to identify your whereabouts? So whether the company has to analyze such things, how we are visible on the internet. Andrew, over to you. Okay, thank you so much to everyone. In terms of the organization, I think that the situation is quite deplorable because the whole OSINT now is in the gray zones. That means that every action has to be challenged and almost illegal. So there are three layers. So the typical counterintelligence, this is what is being called economic intelligence. So let us count. Just to check the company, a person, any signs of bankruptcy or financial instability, ultimate beneficiaries, the origin of the capital, connection to the GR, the arbitration lost, why and why the company is winning the tenders. This is the bottom level of counterintelligence. We have to secure ourselves against enemies, and this is what is required from the organization. You have to be quite cautious and quite prudent. The middle level, which has been born only now, this is about the intelligence. When you control the sectors of the market and your competitors, it becomes of critical importance because the old rules are no longer working and you should not expect the new ones. Either you make your mistakes on your own or you keep track of your competitors and replicate the good measures. And the top level is the strategic one, when you capture new markets, capture new technologies, or capture new disruptive products. This is all about the OSINT, and the companies cannot do without that. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. And now let me ask Dmitry, when you mentioned all those options, all those tiers, you didn't mention hackers, the leaks and phishing sites, the clone sites, public open source data, but you didn't mention that. Well, actually, we have only 57 minutes, not 2 hours. If we deep dive into information security, we will never end. Dmitry, over to you. Okay, let's have a look at OSINT in general. I think that this is the same situation as with the people. If you remember all the major leaks of the last 2 to 3 years. Similarly, food delivery, for instance, everyone does that. What can it result in, apart from identifying whereabouts and who eats what? In essence, this is what shows where the people are present physically. Can you remember the leaks? Let us speak about the vectors related to the people. These might be heads of the companies or some important people. The leaks, the most interesting leak, happened in one big IT chain shop. I learned so much about my acquaintances and friends. And again, this is the vector of how you impact the people. Interesting friends you have. Well, I think that you have the same situation. Well, fortunately, I do not analyze the leaks. If we speak about the technical component, let's have a look at any service which shows IoT things, for instance. you may use Shodom or use an eye and scan the pool of IP addresses that belong to you or to your provider, and look at how many video cameras without protection are going to watch the internet.
Опять же, люди тщеславные, мы любим оставлять себе много интересного и даже
love to leave traces, tell other people about themselves. And this is actually when a person would disclose so much information that can impact the business.
Это нормально, и этим пользуются в том числе злоумышленники.
And criminals are using that as well.
Я когда готовил эту дискуссию, я не думал, что мы повернем ее именно в таком
When I arranged that discussion, I didn't think that we would make such a pivot because as to conventional OSINT officers, you speak about the things that I think are a little bit different from the business stories. So there are the bosses do not go to shops, but in terms of the companies, as an example, for instance, in many public organizations, you have to put your phone in a locker, and when 9 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning, for instance, the geolocation of this or that person is lost and it emerges, re-emerges 6 o'clock p.m. and when this information becomes publicly available, it raises a lot of questions where this person is serving or working, or for instance, when on December 20, everyone starts congratulating everyone without actually exactly naming that festivity, especially when this data is disseminated in personal messages or in social media, and then the database of the social media is being leaked with all the personal messages. And this has something to do with the national security, I think. And I think this is something that the state has to be interested in, how to protect that data.
Да, должна. Но я бы, наверное, все-таки постараюсь нашу, ну, по крайней мере, свою дискуссию свернуть
and I will try to tell you more about the question that the whole event is dedicated to, the information security. I'm not a specialist in OSINT.
С нашей точки зрения, значит, если мы ориентируемся на матрицу,
for instance, if we are guided by tactics and strategies, the first tactics is about the intelligence, and everyone knows that. And criminals who are attacking or about to attack a company are using that. They would study, they would analyze the data about the organization and the objects that they are going to impact. Certainly, in order to ensure security, you have to analyze the same, but only on the side of the defender, in order to close the open words. We speak about technical level, identify the leaks if they were related to identification information, so that question is crucial in terms of security. There are certain problems related to the legality of actions, and every action has to be assessed in terms of whether it may do some damage to anyone, and whether the methods that you are using are legal, are legitimate. Only then you can deal with that. Okay, Vladimir. This is a question of legality. Andrew started with that. Many actions related to OSINT are now in the gray zone. However, we consider OSINT regarding the competitors' intelligence, or OSINT in terms of how we are seen by potential criminal who is analyzing the company, about the public agency, or about the top management, and immediately we actually start discussing the confidential data, personal data, private data, because immediately you merge in a gray zone, you cannot process that data. the person didn't give his or her agreement for us to process that information. What nuances you can name that we have to bear in mind once we build that process in the company? Well, we are changing the topics so fast. Should I take that question or? Well, this is up to you. We have to understand that for every organization that started dealing with OSINT, the initial request would be different. It all started with the organizations that are buying out assets that become crucial importance for them. Because you have to check, for instance, arbitration records, legal records, licenses, and legal entities, numbers, so that you make the right purchase. Now, we have a cyber intelligence growing up in terms of information security. Conventional ones, we are all information security officers, so let's have a look at how we look from outside, what people know about us. And this is a purely technical story. Shutdowns, etc. We look at the leaks, and I will proceed with the leaks a bit later. And here, if you are using different services, there are contractual relations, and there is no ill will or ill intent. So the company says, okay, I agree that you study us, and you look at the PDN, you look at the people, and everyone who is dealing with the industrial OSINT, there is a good tip. Check the people, because you may find a lot of information. You have more than 200 people, and you do not put your phones in a locker. Then, certainly, in the social media, you'll find some images, pictures, photos, passwords on the TV screen, and the feedback, for instance. Feedback is another good source of information. For instance, in the feedback, you may find we have a good canteen, and when our neighbors come to us and they go through the smoking room. So this is such a good canteen, so that's an excellent story for the security service. I think that you did an advertisement for your canteen. We don't have that, so we have just a vending machine. We have a very good security perimeter. But PDN, for instance, that's a real problem. And it can be fixed very well so within the legislation. Those who implemented DLP in terms of the legal importance and cleanness. And the employee has to subscribe to the policies that would legalize the companies obtaining some of your confidential data. And an employee may understand that following an agreement with you, some third party will research your open source data, social media, etc. Ну, то есть вот эта вот красивая фраза, я про нее поговорил, потому что все, кто профессионально этим занимается, так и делают. Вот. Those who are doing that professionally, это прям очень серая зона. То есть получается, they know that this is a gray zone. Что наши супостаты делают это еще и we understand that нету злого умысла, и в целом our criminals are doing that with ill intent, but there is a problem with an agreement obtained from the employees. Well, Vadim, I have a question to you. So, law, gray zone, you have to obtain an agreement, but the hackers who are analyzing us obviously do not get an agreement from the people they are studying. So it means they are 1 or 2 steps ahead of us. And we find ourselves in a blind alley, because if you act within the law and the law is not perfect, we're always 1 step behind, and it means that we will be behind the criminals. What we do? Do we have to violate the law without telling anyone that we are violating the law? Or we obtain an agreement on everything, and the employees would never grant you such an agreement, or you limit that scope of data only with the open source data, what you may see in Shutdown, Quiz, Ribbon database, etc., and you limit it with that. And don't deep dive into the people, otherwise you would infringe the law. Alexei, everything would depend on what problem the business wants to address. If the business wants to address the infrastructural component only, then it would be similar to pin test. The business doesn't want it.
Ну, бизнес говорит безопаснику, сделай мне безопасно.
The business tells the information security officer, make it safe and secure, and probably the top management doesn't know the word OSINT. If you do not mention the sex shops used by the managers, well, that's a very good pattern when a person learns that certain things become public. And these things are quite important, where at least the person tries not to disclose these things. And here we see that the person really says, okay, I don't need this, remove it. I actually driving you at the following. We can try to protect the infrastructure and forget about the people. But the people, in essence, they come to the organization with their devices. They would bring their tablets, and hackers may impact these people through different phishing software, may compromise their devices. If we separate the people and the information security, then we have to realize that in terms of infrastructure, we can do everything perfectly, but the person who is not aware of what is going on, he or she may become a bottleneck or a proxy that would be used by the criminals to penetrate into your organization. Speaking about information security officer that wants something the business doesn't want it, we may say, people, let's sit at the round table, and we have come with the concept of intolerable events, and information security officer now may talk to the top management. And let's agree on that. At the previous session, I answered a question related to Pareto principle. So again, let's get some surface data about our employees, what is available. Let us not deep dive into their social media, but probably let's have a look at the leakages and leaks, and we'll see the scale of the problem. Then we can bring that to the top management and say, look, we have bought a lot of security features, security tools in terms of infrastructure. It looks doubtful, but okay, but we're forgetting about people. Let's not forget about people. And then you take certain steps regarding that. Thank you. Vitaly, would you like to add anything? As far as we are speaking about the tolerable events concept and sex shops, I think that sex shop has to be regarded as an intolerable event. Okay. Well, why not? If the community suggests that, we will consider that. But frankly speaking, OSINT, this is a very broad topic. Vladimir has already said that it proceeded from business, but now this is proceeded from the national security agencies many years ago. And first thing you have to do, if the organization is doing something, in order to obtain information about itself, it has to be done through policies and regulations that we, the users, have to be knowledgeable about. The employees have to know about that. Secondly, if this organization offers such a service, then it has to be done through an agreement or a contract being signed, and it has to proceed from the customer. If the organization does that on its own, looking for someone or something, I'm 100% confident that this activity could be interpreted as illegal.
Тут момент такой, что если мы говорим об OSINT,
If we speak about OSINT,
то, конечно, это нужно делать без
certainly it has to be done without
ущерба для другого лица,
doing damage to another person, another legal entity or organization. This is something that you have to bear in mind. You have to follow certain instructions and orders and following certain internal documents. Then, and certainly the area
определенной предметной частью, для чего ты это делаешь, потому
has to be specified. If your top management says, study some competitive markets, etc., then this is a too broad instruction. There has to be a goal why this activity is being done. In other cases, I would be very cautious.
Алексеевич, то, что вы сказали по поводу злоумышленника, да, который, да, мы
And as for the criminal is concerned in terms of security, we will always be more restricted, more limited, because we have to bear in mind the limitations and restrictions, and the criminals are free. They are already outside the legal framework, and therefore they have many more tools, many more mechanisms.
Надо все возможные методы компенсировать то, что
We have to use all the methods possible in order to compensate for that. For instance, you take stock and use the results.
Логинам и так далее свои, уже. Тогда каким-то образом можно будет постараться
Then somehow we can try to equalize,
с возможностями обороняющимися. Только так.
to match our possibilities and the ones of the criminal.
Да, Дмитрий.
Да,
Okay.
а вам не кажется, что это все-таки тема,
Don't you think that this is a topic of
регулировать можно все, что угодно, запретить?
just discussing niceties? You may regulate whatever we
Мы
want.
говорим про открытые данные, мы говорим про
We're
данные,
speaking about open source data. We are speaking about the
про данные,
data
которые выкладывают сами компании. И
that the
здесь всегда
companies are
возникает
publishing on their
коллизия.
own.
Я не делаю ничего плохого,
And
но
again,
при этом, если я на хорошей,
you say that you're not doing anything wrong, but if you are on the right side of the history, then you have to follow a lot of parameters in order to legalize that.
при этом злоумышленник
And the criminal
абсолютно точно так же, да,
is
он
doing the
не
same
связан,
and is not
здесь, опять же,
bound
мы
by
можем
anything.
столкнуться с историей, когда
And we can run into this story when a person who
полностью профессионально в сфере
is doing that is fully professional
утечками, да,
and is not dealing with the leaks. The leaks are bad, and sometimes they are controlled, sometimes they are not controlled. But the open source things and processing them, I think, is absolutely legal. Let me challenge that. This is just like DLP system. When we implemented DLP systems, it was designed for good.
Работодатели, которые внедряют жалобы, там, до судов доходило.
Nevertheless,
Это первое. Второе, понимаете, мне кажется, тут момент какой. Ведь вопрос не в сборе. Вопрос, вы больше затрагиваете вопрос сбора, да, они...
this is more like collecting data in the open source.
Дальше идет нормализация, обработка, и самое главное она.
And then you have to analyze that.
Это как вот мы с вами...
And when following the results of the analysis, this is just like, for instance, we see a lot of machine learning models and big data analysis. The data is anonymized, and then following the result of the analysis, it turns out that you can find the names and phone numbers, and in essence, collecting big data of open source data, you end up with accumulating data which is sensitive and which is subjected to privacy laws. And for the law, it's all the same, whether you're on the right side of history or not. You have that data and so meet the requirements imposed by the legislation. It is not a matter of banning something or allowing something.
То, что нам доступно, можно и вообще на гостайну выйти.
And
Тьфу-тьфу.
Да,
Otherwise, we can even make
на самом деле это
high
так. И там
treason.
дальше вопрос умысла, целей,
And
сбора,
then
что ты с этим
that would be
сделал,
a
куда ты
question
их
of
принес и так далее.
intent,
Поэтому,
goals, what you've
момент
done
такой, я и
with
говорю,
that,
что
what you have done with
должна быть
that
предметная область.
data.
Нельзя говорить об
There has
OSINT
to be a
беспредметно, просто
limited
как
subject
OSINT сам по
matter
себе.
of
Спасибо. Андрей, вот вопрос к тебе.
your
Ты
research.
начал с того,
This is
что
not OSINT per se
история
of doing
находится
an
сейчас в
OSINT.
черной зоне, но в
You
серой.
said that
серой зоне,
actually OSINT now is in the gray zone.
Судя по тому, что мы сейчас ее начали обсуждать
Judging
с
by
трибуны,
what
и у
we
нас
have
присутствует
discussed,
регулятор,
and present here is the
оно же у нас, как
regulator.
известно, работает на
That
благо
means that the
граждан.
state and the state works for
и
the sake of the
бизнеса.
citizens and business at the same time,
Исключительно.
Да.
На благо
solely
государства,
for the
граждан и
sake
бизнеса.
of
У нас это
citizens
написано
and
в
business.
стратегии
Конституции, да.
и Конституции,
This is
стратегии
actually
национальной
is
безопасности.
enshrined
Да,
in
и
our
именно
national
в
security
такой последовательности.
strategy and in the constitution.
И,
Right.
соответственно,
And
возникает
in the
Последовательность
same,
начинается, если
in
я
that
правильно
very
помню.
order,
в законе о
if I remember
безопасности
correctly,
государства, а граждане внизу.
it starts with the
Предметная область разная.
citizens. And whereas the strategy starts with the interests of the state. Well, if the state pays attention to that, we can assume that the state would like to regulate that sphere somehow. What would be the regulation, in your opinion, that on the one hand, we don't tighten the knots so much that you have to go to the black zone, becoming illegal totally, and at the same time that you can benefit the business that turns for your service? Well, I would expand our topic at hand because before we said that the data is leaked and someone gets hold of that, and let me remind you that. And this case is 13 years old. Pulzhaitskaya metro station, some employees,
Организация, про которую вы хотите сказать, 13 лет.
the organization you're working, you are telling us about 13 years is almost nothing. Okay. Certain organization at some metro station used the authority of its organization
приносить письмо, что их сотрудники, вот эти люди, могли бы ставить бесплатно.
and applied for free parking lots.
Что вот эти автомобили вот этих людей стоят бесплатно. Они образуют единый список. Вот,
and it would make one single list of people who are entitled to the free parking lot and who has to be punished for disclosing that information. I think that these are the parking lots that have to be penalized for that.
13 лет.
The employees of that agency cannot be punished.
Я бы здесь регулирование начал с того, что
I would start the regulation with saying that apart from the regulation,
растущая и еще и дополняемая там
regulations now are growing and are complemented with the artificial intelligence and machine learning. We have to tell the people about what is good and what is bad, and I disagree with the LP case. For instance, if a person believes that his privacy was violated because he is doing some personal communication using my working computer, so just like hijacking my car.
То есть я к чему? Что сейчас нужно первое
What I mean to say, we have to expand our legislation so that it embraces not only those who are hacking the data, but also those who are allowing for the leaks. And we have to launch the public awareness campaigns because the people, even the most serious business organizations, do not understand how the world has changed. It reminds me of a discussion that we had several years ago at one of the fora when the vendor representative said that there has to be more responsibilities and liabilities, then everything would be good with the security perimeter. I think that our MPs after that say that the business supports us, therefore everyone who allowed for at least one leak has to be fined for 4% of their turnover. But in essence, what Andrei says that this is the parking lot owner who becomes a scapegoat, and this is the person who works with the personal data who is becoming a scapegoat. And the criminals are totally indifferent to that. Well, actually, you have to control what lists are being put on your parking lots. Well, as far as this question has been raised, and you, on behalf of the state, are seeking to set certain orders, set certain rules, probably not binding in terms of the cyber intelligence, offering certain matrices, tactics, and techniques in that area. Do you plan to issue something? Well, I'm not in a position to speak on behalf of the state. Well, the state is multifaceted, so I'm not in a position to speak on behalf of the whole state, but in part related to cybersecurity and solely in the framework of those fields of activity which are allowed and which are envisaged by the regulations. I'm not ready to discuss personal data. I agree that we are not speaking about the personal data. This is only part of the problem. But the question is that, for instance, the system architecture data, for instance, is in the open source, is publicly available. On the social media, people are discussing sensitive questions related to penetration into the system, hacking the system, and security assessment with examples of weaknesses and strengths also been publicly available, been posted on Telegram channels. Yes, that's right. And we have to fix it. And personal accounts of the users certainly play an important role, but this is not the only thing to bear in mind. We have to take a more systemic approach to that. I meant to say that we can discuss something, we can regulate something, or give some recommendations only within the activity that we are doing. We can use the methods which do not infringe the law in order to ensure information security, for instance. Cyber intelligence is being widely used as a term, but I'm not going to speak about intelligence, but this is about threats identification. Open source intelligence. Such an objective has to be put forward, and we're going to do that step by step, and we're going to discuss that as how it has to be addressed following the open source data. Certainly, we're speaking about the passive methods first and foremost, so that and, for instance, we may use the search engines as an example. The industry is growing, and if the hackers are using that actively, we have to counter these actions. For instance, building our own processes to resist to that. Vladimir, over to you. First,
я, значит, подглядывал тут на днях, мне
one of the days, it was not a state secret. I learned some legislative initiatives, and everything related to OSINT should not be prohibited. I mean, the tools, otherwise we would be weak vis-a-vis our rivals. And I hope that the legislation would be drafted only in terms of the ill intent. Once you did damage to a person, if there was an attempt made to damage a person, blackmailing, then it means an ill intent and it would be followed by punishment. But we should not prohibit the tools that are being used. There is another thing.
Есть же еще четвертый, наверное, раздел OSINT. Это там, где
there is the fourth section of OSINT. This is where organization is connected to the work with their third parties, with the citizens.
Вся история про там так называемый brand protection. Это та же самая киберразведка, но направленная на ваших клиентов.
This is the same cyber intelligence, which is aimed at your clients. For instance, you have not been hacked yet, but your clients are being hacked. Certain their databases are being hacked, where a phishing site similar to theirs is being done. So your clients are being attacked using your brand or certain knowledge about you.
Это точно про персональные данные.
And once you start dealing with that, then this is about the personal data, and you have 50 million users,
и вам точно хочется ее получить,
and you want to
точно не собирали с граждан согласия на поиск
get that information. Certainly you didn't get a consent from your users on looking for information about them in darknet, and sometimes that data would be sold for money.
Все плохие ребята к этому доступ имеют. И как
all the bad guys have access to that data. And how do you understand whether this is a leak or this is a fake news? So you have to buy a sample, and I know many companies would be buying for that sample, although this is a very doubtful activity because this money is not in Russia.
Однозначно нужно, потому что мы...
Do you have to deal with that? Yes.
Прямая, да,
This is a direct financing, which is legally punishable. This is a criminal activity, so the guys there admit openly that they do that to make profit. This is just like paying a ransom for having your system encrypted. And this market is evolving, and for instance, what happened in the United States, that market is as huge as that because people are eager to pay ransom. This is no-go, but what if this is just a small case? We can do that, at least we know what is the origin of that problem, of that hacker's attack. Certainly, you have to do intelligence, cyber intelligence, especially if you deal with the third parties. Well, nothing has been stolen, and 10,000 citizens paid money on some other company's website. And we have nothing to do with that, but this is up to you to deal with that, because no one else is going to do that. This is your area of responsibility. As far as you allowed me to excuse myself a bit earlier, so this is my last statement. When we say about regulation, most likely that we're about banning. But we're not speaking about banning anything. And Vladimir put that correctly. Intent is very important, and everything would be assessed in terms of the intent. I'm speaking about regulation, and on the contrary, I'm speaking about introducing certain procedures in order to address some specific thing. Otherwise, for instance, we all are specialists, and again, they would say, okay, they're banning everything once again. We have not even scratched the surface of something, but they have banned everything altogether. In our case, we are not banning anything. We are just using certain means and methods in order to ensure information security. Vitaly, look, if you remember, there was a case in Obninsk when an employee of the mobile provider scanned IP space doing his job, and it turned out that he scanned the cyber information objects, and he was penalized for that. He was punished criminally, prosecuted criminally, but he was doing his job in essence. This is what was done. It was pure OSINT, in the sense that there was no ill intent. We do not know all the details, whether there was an ill intent or not.
Подождите, еще раз,
No.
что он там делал,
Look,
зачем он сканировал объекты?
we do not
Это
know
вопрос,
why
мы не
this person was
погружены в
scanning
этот
the
конкретно,
objects.
в этот
We do not
случай,
know
понимаете? То есть,
the details
поэтому
of that
с какой целью он
situation.
сканировал
That's why.
объекты свои
Why
по разрешению?
this
Я же с
person
чего
was
говорил,
scanning
с
the
чего начинал?
objects.
О том, что
What I
все
started my
действия,
conversation
если мы
with, all
говорим
the
в рамках,
actions,
да, мы находимся в ограниченных возможностях относительно нарушителя. Да, и мы ограничены именно законодательными нормами права. Мы не можем находиться вне этого. Значит,
legislation. We cannot go beyond the scope of the legislation. And certainly I do not know whether it was an ill intent and why this person was doing what he did, but you have to prove the ill intent and the damage.
Без этого
Without
там
that,
написано, приведший к ущербу.
Ну, во-первых,
actually, as the law says, which resulted in a damage. So the amount was not indicated, and the intent should be proven later on. So first, this person was detained. I'm not going to discuss that. I'm not ready. I'm not prepared to discuss that legal case. Like in a movie, long live our court, which is most humane in the world, so I follow that motto. Alexei, I have to go. While you have not banned everything, I have to go elsewhere in order to make another presentation.
На зеленый свет ездить можно, на желтый приходится, на красный свет ездить не надо. Всем спасибо, извините.
You can go when the lights are green, you can go if the lights are yellow, and there is no go if the light is red. Well, in essence, we are not finishing our session. So these are the fans of Masalovich who has come. Andrew, do you have any concerns related to the topic at hand? For instance, as a representative of the company which is making analysis, what initiative you may propose for the regulators? What should be done and what should not be done? Well, we spoke about regulation, about tightening the knots, but at the same time, we don't want to do anything like that. We want to assess the environment around the company, what data were leaked,
будем говорить объективно, как это видит злоумышленник.
as objectively as the criminals see that.
Разделять OSINT на пассивный.
Remember, someone suggested that OSINT should be divided into passive and active. We have to understand clearly if we can collect data without interacting with certain companies and without being subject to the articles of criminal law, penal code, then we have to do that without any limitations imposed on the tools. Vladimir already mentioned that if we are using any active tools which imply dealing with a third party, so let's have a look at their perimeter as well. Probably we can do that with good intentions, but as has already been said, the ill intent would be proven a bit later. And we first would be arrested. Well, I think that we have to highlight that somehow, but how we do that? This is an open question. I think that we have to divide OSINT into passive and active, and this is number one. Then, I would like to continue the topic that was raised by Vladimir. This is regarding the leaks and who is paying the ransom. We said that there is a risk related to sponsoring illegal actions, but let us also remember the following: there might be compiled leaks, in a sense that you not immediately understand whether this is a fake leak or this is a real leak.
да, пытаясь узнать, действительно ли там что-то утекло или нет, мы разгоняем рынок.
And trying to understand the leak, we now are boosting the market of the leaks. Okay, so the customer says, okay, my leak is boot. What I may do, 30 more leaks can be made, can be arranged, and you just make a compilation because you have so much data.
Все специалисты в этих компаниях будут...
All the specialists in those companies would have a lot of headache and saying, oh, whether our data has been leaked or this is rather just a compilation or a regulator may criticize us for the leaks being done every week. You have to understand only one question, how you check whether this is original leak or not.
Спасибо.
Okay, thank you. And I do think that it may result in cyber wars when by means of a compilation and imitation of leaks, simulation of leaks, we can present the information as a real one, compiling that. And we may actually get content and dozens of times say that somebody is a bad man and everyone would see that this guy is bad. I think that you tip the criminals how to act.
Да. Виталий Сергеевич, ну вот прежде чем мы вас
Vitaly,
отпустим, у нас
but
есть
before we
вопросы из
excuse you, we have some questions from the flu. And these questions are related to your agency. There are two key questions. The first one is whether you plan to license OSINT or cyber intelligence, whatever you call that activity. So this is the first question. And the second, let us imagine that, for instance, certain company, certain person got an open source data about someone on something about IP cameras with access to internet. If they provide you with that information, will they be asked where they get that information from, or you would just say thank you and we'll start working with that data?
По информационной безопасности не поговорим.
I thought that we will never speak about information security. Okay. As for licensing is concerned, it depends on our plans, what you call our plans. In the nearest future, actually, we don't have any plans like that, so there are no initiatives regarding changes and amendments in the regulations. So licensing is a very difficult question in the context we find ourselves in. We don't have it. We now don't want to license anything. If we are provided with such data, then first we'll have to see what kind of data it is. Our authority is limited. We cannot work in all the areas. We are working only with the public companies or with the critical infrastructure. Certainly, we will have to see the source of data. It has to be the person which is not just being disguised by a nickname, because probably we'll have to deal with that person in order to specify certain things, some technical details. And the second thing, if the person who provided us with the data fails to inform the information that was leaked, so this would be the algorithm of our activity. Well, thank you so much. So it happens so that, well, many specialists are concerned that if they directly tell you about such leaks to the company which was subject to such a hacking or to a leak, the company may perceive that as a request for ransom, so that a person has an ill intent and they may render that information to the law enforcement, to the police, and the person who had no ill intent would suffer from trying to benefit someone. I think that you meant one transport company with 3 letters abbreviation.
Я могу, допустим, как на примере, если мы говорим не про какие-то утечки, но там про уязвимости в продуктах. Вот мы перейдем
We're speaking about vulnerabilities in certain products, and I think that we can make such a bridge to our evening discussion regarding the vulnerabilities database. Sometimes the specialists do not want to interact for some reasons, and then we will assume the responsibility for such communication. But we need to communicate with these people in order to specify certain technical peculiarities. And if there are any reasons for that,
мы замыкаем этот вопрос на
then
себя и уже со стороны
we
регулятора
would assume all the responsibility for that, and
Что
as a
касается
regulator would
утечек,
disseminate that
мы тоже
information.
от себя отправляем, и
As the leaks are concerned, we'll do
мы точно выкупы
that ourselves. And we are not, for sure, asking for any ransoms.
Если не просим.
And if there are no ifs, if a person, for instance, publishes an article on harbor.ru that he found some vulnerability in a transport company, and after that, the person was subjected to criminal punishment or prosecution. And months before the person published that article, he sent that information to the company. Look, you have this vulnerability. Well, as far as we are not part of the criminal procedures, I'm not in a position to discuss that. There are lots of nuances. I'm not prepared to discuss the enforcement of the criminal code. I'm not prepared for that. Otherwise, I may say too much, and then, along with these specialists, I would be prosecuted criminally. This is something that I really do not want. So I do not know how and why this person might be prosecuted. Probably the person just invented that, thumbsucked that,
С призывом давайте все вперед.
and published that information.
Может и такое было, кто знает.
Go on and exploit that. Okay.
Возможно, специалисты, потому что, есть
Probably.
определенное
Well,
недоверие государственным органам.
there is some mistrust to the public agencies, especially proceeding from the facts.
Сообщение иногда прилетает.
And sometimes such messages are punishable. Well, yes, there is a mistrust with the public authorities.
Я что-то запрещаю, как бы.
So I'm sitting here in front of you, but you may get an impression that I'm banning everything. No, this is not like that. Then probably a public authority on the website might publish a memorandum or a manifesto to the extent
в котором опишет практику.
your regulations allow for that, and you may describe the best practice,
Как поступать в такого рода ситуациях?
how to act in such a situation,
Государство заинтересовано
that the people would understand that the state is interested in getting such data, but there are certain limits that should not be crossed.
Не могу еще раз.
Well,
Я могу говорить только за то, за что мы отвечаем. Вот с точки зрения
I'm not in the position to comment on everything. We're responsible for the vulnerabilities, and there is a public regulation which has been published on the threats database website, and that regulation
обнаружение такой информации. И там первым пунктом это проинформировать.
indicates what you have to do in case of such a threat being identified. First of all, you inform the resource owner, and if this owner doesn't react, we recommend to send that information to us. This is not a kind of a memorandum. We are not in a position to publish such a memorandum because we are more practitioners.
Это к ним. А вот мы с точки зрения своих рекомендаций, мы такое, а их там не придерживаются. Вот я буду после вечером рассказывать там примеры некоторых.
In the evening, I will give you some examples how people are treating them. Whether you publish that or not publish, the result is still regrettable. Okay, thank you so much, Vitaly. Well, thank you so much, Vitaly. I don't have any fans, so therefore I will excuse myself, but you'll be there in the evening, right? Right.
Не, вам нельзя, да, вам надо до конца.
You have to stay to the very end. I have a question to you. A question from the chat box.
Надо учить в рамках
Whether
образовательной деятельности
we have to train
OSINT как таковому, учат ли
OSINT.
где-нибудь или не учат.
Is OSINT been taught anywhere professionally?
Ну, к сожалению,
Dmitry?
именно,
Well,
именно
unfortunately,
профессионального обучения в том виде,
there is no
в котором мы
professional
привыкли,
training
его нет, поскольку
the way
всё-таки
we are used to
методика
that,
не
because
описана
the
досконально,
methodology
и она
is not
постоянно
thoroughly
меняется,
described,
да,
and the
в
methodology
связи
is changing every now and then
политическими веяниями
due to
и
political
историческими
things and
веяниями и так
historical
далее.
things, etc.
Но при этом
But
множество
at the same time,
мест, где учат OSINT,
there are
да.
lots of places where OSINT would be trained. Andrey and some other companies are training OSINT.
Для многих молодых и юных OSINT это зайти на какой-нибудь...
В глаз Бога, да, и пробить кого-нибудь.
We have to check the God's voice and see what is going on there. Yes, you can check that website and, for instance, enter the phone number and believe that you are a big OSINT officer, and those who know what Google and Yandex are about, you can just send that query. This looks like a puzzle when we try to bring different data into one big story, and it may somehow impact the company or the person. Okay, Vladimir, I have a question to you. Many companies would send their speakers to speak at certain conferences, and they would render the real cases, and that information might be used by criminals in order to launch attacks. Shouldn't we limit these speakers in terms of the cases that they can disclose? I think that we have to approach that on a case-by-case. Globally, I'm against that. There is some internal information security rule. If someone published a commercial secret or disclosed some confidential data, then he has to be punished. But I think that there is a trend, a standing trend that I'm not going to tell anyone how I'm building my cybersecurity, information security perimeter, how I'm fixing the leaks, etc. I don't think that this is the right approach, because the current situation and that approach that you don't tell anyone about anything doesn't help us to fix the leaks or the problems. We have to argue, that we have to challenge. Don't publish the keys, but you don't tell anyone anything, and therefore you won't be hacked. This principle doesn't work. I think that these things are more typical of the Russian information security community. If we look at Europe or the United States, at such conferences, the colleagues would gather, would discuss some vulnerabilities, some cases, but in Russia, it looks the following way. We have gathered, we kept silent, we got some drinks, and that's it. We call it a day. Once something happens that may impact anyone else, it remains local. And instead of disclosing the information and discuss that openly, how you may counter that situation altogether, we try to do that alone, extinguishing the fire with a bucket of water. In order to develop OSINT, you have to tell everything and everywhere. So the answer is, we don't have to ban anything. When the information is being published on Telegram channels about different hacks and attacks, we don't have to ban that. Look, we all were brought up in the Soviet times, not all of us. Okay, at least those on that stage, when there were just fixed-line telephones. And when the telephone was installed, it was accompanied by the reference book of all the phone numbers of the city. And now this reference book, this contact book, could be regarded as a tool for hacking someone. And Vladimir said that don't leave keys anywhere. And remember that in the Soviet times, the keys to the door would be kept under the carpet in front of the door. Well, certain things may help us to come up with some profound conclusions which are not obvious. And here probably the main objective is just to incorporate that in the threats model and how we may mitigate that. The bans and prohibitions is not a solution otherwise. We will come up with a situation when everyone actually would be sitting on the stage and would keep silent for some time, then would say thank you, and let's call it today. At my previous job, a job or a service, well, where in my previous position, this is how you disclose the details. We had a lot of young people, and the new generation make a lot of selfies. So they shoot videos, and every time actually I saw that, it triggered me because I realized how much information is being published. And this is about OSINT and the people, how it affects the people. If there are lots of people and you do not put the phones in the locker, then the company would be in trouble. Vadim, a question to you. How frequently you have to analyze yourself on the internet? In terms of leaks, clone, sites, publicly available vulnerabilities, open ports, data about your key, personnel, tokens, secrets from GitHub, etc. I got the question. That was a very interesting question. Okay. In brief, you have to do that continuously, or to the extent your budget allows for that. If, for instance, if there is a special person designated to do that, you have to see, actually, how much time it takes to collect that information. So the person actually made a report, and then he would go on leave for a weekend, and then would resume his activity starting from Monday. And it would result in burning out. So the person would collect the whole scope of data again and again, and would burn out. But while the data has been acquired and assembled, collected, put in the report, being analyzed to enable certain decision-making conclusions for the cybersecurity office, etc. A lot of time may elapse, and that data would become obsolete. You learned that some weeks ago certain data were leaked, etc., etc. So what I meant to say is that ideally any OSINT process, any data collection process, and their subsequent systematizing and analysis should be automated. If you do that, when you collect the data automatically, when you do your analysis automatically, then you will see the relevant picture of the world. If not, then you will be lagging behind and you will see the weather focused for the last week. And probably the last question to each of you. Do you believe that sometime from now, there will be some OSINT GPT that will automatically collect all the data, and a person would not be needed for that, just like dark GPT, fraud GPT, etc. Something that work with ill intent. And do you think that we'll have a tool that without a human factor would collect all the data proceeding from the original request?
Но если коротко, то я верю, что так можно сделать, потому что по большому счету
I believe that it can be done, because in essence, such GPT services,
которыми зашиты эти языковые модели, они предоставляют удобный интерфейс взаимодействия с
they render a very flexible and convenient interface to do with something else. And something else, this is the whole conveyor of OSINT and subsequent analytics, something that I spoke about before and now. So I believe that we will end up with that. and it would be sooner rather than later. Vladimir, I think that we're halfway to that. It is how it works now in terms of looking for data.
Не LLM, есть хорошее название BAM. Вот, большие языковые модели.
There are now big language models.
Заглянул в какую-то нормативку явно. Да, где
You obviously looked into some legislation which prohibits LLM, but rather it uses the big language models. Well, you use Russian letters, what you need.
Проблема, ну, та, которая тяжело автоматизируется, это, конечно, вот
Something which is not automated easily. The crawlers, the systems which are done manually, and all the time they would be closed, and crawlers have been
Спасибо, Дмитрий.
rewritten every now and then, etc.
Любая нейронка
Well,
работает
now any neural
неусидчивый студент. Ну, ввиду того, что если она не знает,
a network works as a stubborn student. When it doesn't know anything, it invents things. And when we invent something without being informed properly, then it may lead us to a totally wrong destination.
Что хуже?
And what is worse, either really the data which we obtain from open source due to the neural network, or that the neural network has invented something. Well, at the moment, I think that this is the only good way to collect some facts. Were factoids. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. And we conclude our discussion. And as a brief summary, let me draw attention to the fact that the very idea of that discussion emerged under the influence of the message that we got from the public authorities. They wanted to have us discuss that, to see what requests have been set by the specialists, by the industry. Because obviously that as far as OSINT is growing rapidly, and you see that we even couldn't come to some common understanding what OSINT is. It might be about cyber intelligence or economic security, or this is about brand protection. For others, this is just monitoring of regular clone websites which never would be called OSINT and would fall in the realm of cyber security officer. But now this is being called OSINT. Obviously, the state wants to regulate OSINT so that we do not find ourselves in a situation when we are overregulated. I think that this is high time for us to start developing the questions how to build OSINT in your company. If you're talking to the third parties, you have to act within the legal framework, describing limitations and responsibilities that may emerge due to the analysis of that public information. And most importantly, once we have certain ideas, don't be shy to get in touch either directly or indirectly with the regulator in order to send the message to offer the right initiatives. Then the regulator would not be just stood in its own juice, but would get within this public-private partnership what you need, and then both parties would win. Thank you so much, and we will continue at that stage, and in other rooms we'll speak about information security and cyber security. Thank you so much.